For the first and only time, it's June 7th, 2024. I'm Jacob Simon, and you're tuned in to Climate Action Figures.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Climate Action Figures. My name is John Whidden, and this week on the show you get to meet a climate action figure who has definitely found a niche on social media. But first, this week's Quick Fix, which comes from Amelia in Calgary, who tells us that she has moved all her savings and credit cards from a mainline bank to EQ Bank over big banks still funding climate polluters. Wow, that's quite the action. So if you have a quick fix for us, please send it in via email or social media. Now, Jacob has been sitting patiently. Welcome to Climate Action Figures, Jacob.
Thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited.
So am I. What do you think about our quick fix today?
I love that quick fix. I also switched banks a few years ago after I realized how much banks fund fossil fuel companies and help accelerate the climate crisis using our money. And usually we don't know about it. And that's not cool. So I switched to a bank that invests all of their funds into renewable energy and mostly community solar. And I just feel a lot better doing it. And that's the best kind of solution where, from me, it's basically the same. You know, I just switch from one bank to another. It's not like I have an emotional attachment to my bank or anything like that. So actually, my current bank is a lot easier to deal with, you know, with customer service and everything like that. So absolutely great call. Everyone should do that without a doubt.
Well, way to go, Amelia. Just in case listeners do not know you yet, your Insta bio says daily good stories for a breath of fresh air. You have hundreds of thousands of followers on various social media platforms, and all of this seems to revolve around sharing positive stories about the environment. How am I doing so far?
You're spot on. That's exactly right. I basically walk around New York City where I live, and I talk about all the good news stories I happen to find. 95% of them are related to the environment because that's what I'm passionate about and that's what I'm looking for. Occasionally I slip something else in there. But yeah, just good stories, positivity around solutions and progress, and trying to spread some joy.
Yeah, it's a great thing. I definitely recommend that you check it out on Instagram, and TikTok are your main two, right?
Yeah.
And do you want to tell us how people can do that if they want to hit pause and go check one out right now?
Totally. Yeah, I'm on both Instagram and TikTok at Jacob Simon Says. So it's just my name and then says after. And yeah, like you said, Instagram, TikTok are the main two. YouTube coming soon, a few other avenues that are slightly different, but the main thing is, yeah, these 60-ish second news recaps and spreading a lot of happiness.
Right. Now, that daily dose of delightful dispatch often wraps up with you saying something along the lines of, I find daily good stories to replace dread with hope. Keep the good going and tell me what I missed. Does it take you a lot of time to find content for this minute?
Finding the content takes the longest. I think that filming and editing is actually a lot quicker. The research takes some time, and it's because of a few reasons. There is quite a lot of good news out there. Usually when I tell people what I do, I'm like, I report good environmental news. They're like, what? Does that even exist? And I'm like, yeah, it does. There's actually a lot of it. It just isn't always as loud as the bad stuff, perhaps. And now that I've gotten into a flow of how I do my research, I'm able to find too many stories a lot of the time, and I get to be picky, which is the best possible problem to have. But basically, every morning, I have about 25 publications that are pinned on my browser, and I comb through those, and if any story is related to the environment and like sparks my kind of interest and is positive, I bookmark it. And once I comb through all those and a couple of newsletters that I subscribe to, and I follow some other accounts on social media that share news as well, maybe I'll look into some of those stories. I kind of have a bank of potential stories to cover that day. And then I will go back and read through those, and I try and pull in a few different kinds of stories. So if the first one is centered around a policy update, the second one is maybe on progress towards more renewable power. The third one will be an animal coming back from the brink of extinction. The fourth one will focus on a person coming up with a solution themselves, just to try and get like a more holistic view of a bunch of good news stories. It keeps it fresh, keeps people interested. And yeah, I try and switch up the publications that I find things from, but there's definitely some favorites of mine that I'm super thankful for. Couldn't do it without their incredible reporting. So the research takes the longest, and the second longest is writing the scripts, because there's so much juice and so many good things I want to include. But the challenge of including 4 stories in just over a minute is quite tricky. I basically need to say one sentence on each story. So I walk a fine line between including as much information as I possibly can, but being concise and holding on to that attention that is quite competitive in a social media realm. And yeah, it's like people can go into the stories and learn more if they want to, but I still want to leave them with enough where they could just watch my video and be like, oh, I understand that. Like, I get why that's good news, and that's really cool.
Is it hard to be creative with the way you do it? Because you must not want to do the same, and you clearly don't do the same shtick every day.
I think some limitations actually help my creativity. If I didn't stick to a kind of formula, it would be a bit too overwhelming for me. And I think it also helps that I'm not coming up with an original idea every day, because I know that I'll be covering the good news, but I'm not making it. I'm not making the good news. It's whatever I find. So my creativity comes in the way that I'm framing it, and the location and the specific words. I'm a writer first and foremost, so I enjoy the creativity in the writing process. And that's actually really helped me stay consistent. I have a bunch of creator friends that don't stick to one kind of avenue, and because of that, they get to be more creative, but it's overwhelming. There's an endless amount of things that you could do. Whereas for me, like, I know I'm reporting the good news. I know I got to find that. So that's like where I start. And then once I'm already rolling, I'm like, oh, maybe I should try wording it this way today. Like, that could be kind of fun. Or I should try this sound in the background, or small things like that. I get to also collaborate with people, and I try and bring people in to be in my videos with me. And that's a lot of fun, getting to hear their take and film with them and show them my process and kind of compare and contrast the way we work on things. So definitely keeping it fresh. Occasionally, if a story I feel like deserves a full 60 seconds, I will just focus on one story, and then I can be a little bit different in the way that I frame things as well. But for sure, my main thing is, 4 stories. I'm talking about the good news in the best way that I can, and then how I do that and where I do that is kind of where I get to be creative.
You provide these daily stories of good environmental news, Jacob, and that it clearly resonates with countless people. As you have pondered this success, what do you think is at the core of it?
There's a lot of negativity in the world, especially in the news world and especially in the environment. And I think that legacy media and traditional news publications focus on the bad because of something called the negativity bias. There's a great study posted in Nature Human Behavior called Negativity Drives Online News Consumption. And they studied over 100,000 different variations of news stories that generated millions and millions of clicks, and literally found that if a headline includes negative words, it will get more clicks. It gets a higher click-through rate by just over 2%. And it's literally proven that it's better business for these traditional legacy media publications to be negative. And algorithms feed into that too. If someone gets mad and starts an argument in the comments and then someone argues back, it boosts the content. And I think a lot of the time when I started out on this kind of positivity journey, people are like, well, that won't work. People don't want it, because they confuse what we get from these media publications with what people want. But the truth is, we don't want that. We want a realistic take on the world, but the information we're fed is not realistic. They hyperfixate on a single negative story and blow it out of proportion a lot of the time, because they know people are going to click into that and kind of out of fear. My theory was that people want some good stuff too. And especially in the environment, when I started learning and taking courses, I got quite down. The reality of the situation is quite dire, and we need to act so much faster, and we need to implement all these great solutions we had. But we were learning about the solutions, and I'm like, let's talk about these more. I'm the type of person that if I get afraid, I will kind of be paralyzing and cower away and shrink down. But if I feel motivated and empowered by a community of people all acting together and learning about all these great pieces of progress that are going on, I will step up to the plate. And I knew I couldn't be the only one. So I started pulling in all the good news and positivity that I could find and sending it to some of my classmates in a newsletter. And they really loved it. They're like, this is super helpful, kind of break through all the negativity and the noise and the fog. What started out to my classmates kind of extended to friends and family and then to strangers. And I was like, well, people really resonate with this in a written form. Maybe they'll resonate with it in a video form too, with the explosion of short form video. So I kind of started talking about the same things I was writing, just getting behind the camera. And obviously my format has evolved over time, but keeping it pretty basic from the start and just focusing on the information and being like, you probably haven't heard these stories, but they're all true. They're all great. They're all happening. And we can continue creating these good stories. We can be that person that comes up with a solution and implements it, or joins that volunteer group, or donates their time or money to a cause. And it's not this like far away person up on a pedestal that's doing these things. It's normal Jill and Jane, Jill and Joe.
Exactly.
That's what I meant to say. It's just normal people, and it's achievable, and we can all be a part of it. And I think the more positivity that I can bring into my audience and into the social media world, the more people realize that they can continue and keep it going.
It's interesting to hear a bit about the trajectory of how this came together. When you talk about your classmates and sending the emails around, how far back was that?
That was it 2 years ago or 3 years ago? It was 3 years ago that I started with the newsletter. Yeah. And I was working as a copywriter, so I had done a lot of writing, but never kind of anything for myself. And I felt very passionate about this, and it seemed like something I wanted to start to create. And I had actually made some social media content prior, but not in the educational realm. It was all art related, or actually I used to be an athlete. I was a pairs figure skater, and I posted some videos of myself skating. And then I kind of took a break from social media for a couple of years. And then after this newsletter and the idea came out to start posting on social media for these topics, I was like, well, I have this profile, haven't used it in a while, but why don't I just use that and see where we go.
I'm glad you mentioned the figure skating, because I had completely forgotten. I read somewhere that you were a very high level figure skater, heading toward the Olympics even, maybe, was it?
Yeah, that was the goal. So I started skating when I was 7, and my junior year of high school, I made Team USA, and I did pairs from the start. So it's me and a partner doing lifts and throws and jumps and all that fun stuff. And mostly because I just wanted a friend next to me so I could talk to them while skating. And yeah, I grew to love the sport. Made Team USA junior year, was traveling the world, competing in Grand Prix and Worlds. And I relocated to Colorado Springs to train at the Olympic Training Center. And yeah, Olympics was the goal. I never made it that far. I actually dislocated my shoulder doing a lift in practice with my partner, and I was no longer able to lift someone over my head, a human being. So that was career over. It was a fun chapter.
And
though.
You must have been very disappointed at that point that was the end of that dream, I guess.
Very disappointed, mostly that I couldn't give up the sport on my own terms. It was taken away from me because of injury. And I feel very, very happy with what I accomplished. It was so much more than I ever thought I would. But I still wish I could have made the decision to walk away instead of that decision being made for me. However, it's a very dangerous sport. So many people get injured. I'm not the exception here. But I was definitely very lost for a while and didn't know what I wanted to do because I was so singularly focused on one goal. And it's like, compete to the best of my ability, medal at nationals, make worlds, make the Olympics. Like, how can we maximize this? And that was basically it. Like, everything I consumed, everything I focused on was this single goal, which I think is rare in the world. There's like so much going on and it's hard to be singularly focused. And I was so passionate. It was such a good creative outlet. The sport of figure skating is half artistic. It's half the choreography and the way that you present yourself, and it's acting, and it's your relationship with your partner. And then there's the other technical side of things, which is the tricks that you're doing. And it's a really unique sport in that you have both together, and you have, a base score for the things you're doing, but you're also judged. And I think that creative outlet was definitely something that was missing in my life until I got into the social media game.
Now, between that time where you were so focused on figure skating and now when you've blossomed into this new world, did you imagine that happening in any form, or did you have other ideas? You said you were a copywriter. Did you have other goals and dreams about what you might do with your life?
I absolutely never thought I would be a social media content creator. Probably, if you asked me, 10 years ago, I'd still think that I'd be skating because my plan wasn't to retire so young. I think that I have a lot of other passions. And yeah, after I stopped skating, it was right around COVID. So it was hard to do the things that we wanted to do. But I graduated school and I moved back home to Chicago, which is where I was from. And I was working from remotely at a PR agency doing copywriting. And within a few months, it was very clear that that wasn't for me. I wasn't passionate about it. I wasn't able to get interested in making these rich companies richer. And we would get some backlash. I worked for some candy companies and they used some ingredients that weren't sourced from the best locations. And we would get some backlash on social media. And as their, public relations rep, it was kind of my job to defend them. And I'm like, actually, I kind of agree with that other side. Like they have some points here. Like that's really interesting. And then I got the opportunity to travel for a couple months, did some solo traveling, and I really had a lot of introspective moments and trying to determine what I would be able to do with my life and be happy, looking backwards. I'm a firm believer that the dots never connect to looking forward. They only connect to looking backwards. So it's impossible to predict what we're going to do. But I wanted to do something that I was proud of. And as I started learning about the environment, I'm like, I'm in too deep. Like I can't back away now. I know too much, and I would feel so unfulfilled if I had this information and I knew how serious the climate crisis is, and I didn't do whatever I could to try and prevent it. I took some time to figure out what my authentic kind of place in the climate movement could be. And, I'm not like a technical minded person. I'm not a scientist. Like I might not be the one working on these solutions that we need, but I studied communications my whole life and I had done writing and I'm good at kind of portraying a story from my skating days. And that's what I think I found to be good at and maybe also is lacking from the climate movement. We have enough solutions right now to kind of fix our problems. We need to implement them. And to implement them, we need to get people behind them. And we need to have collective and political will to do that. And I think the best way to do it is by talking about it and telling stories about it.
And people just need to hear about them, maybe.
Totally. They need to hear about them. They need to realize that it's not too late. Things can progress the way that they're going. They can get a lot worse or they can get a lot better. So let's do whatever we can to be on the let's get a lot better path, And that's where I felt like I could fit in well. And here we are.
Going back to your daily dose of good, our creative consultant, Kayla, who's in her mid-20s, would like to know if you have a favorite piece of good news that you've posted, maybe one or two that really jumped out at you.
There's so many. I post dozens a week. I think that my favorite stories tend to revolve around people and I guess, quote unquote, normal people stepping up to solve a problem. And a great story that was recently posted by The Guardian, who posts a lot of climate solutions content. They actually started a new series on DIY solutions, which is, like I just said, kind of normal residents, normal citizens identifying a problem in their community and doing something about it. And this story was about two young women named Janine and Nicole. They were kind of trying to combat fast fashion and lack of access to affordable clothing. And they started a free clothing swap in LA where people can bring clothes that they don't want anymore, but shouldn't be thrown out. We don't want to have more textile waste. So people can bring clothes and they can walk away with other clothes. And, you can stay fashionable, you can stay fresh with your repertoire of clothing. But you don't need to contribute to the harms of creating waste and the manufacturing harms behind the fashion industry and, fast fashion in particular. But really, we have enough clothing right now to clothe the next six generations. Right. So any way to kind of reuse what's already out there, thrifting is a great option, but even that, it does cost money and people may not be able to do that. And depending on where you are, the thrifting options can vary a lot.
Jacob, thinking about your audience reaction and feedback you get, have you been surprised by what has resonated with your followers?
I'm very fortunate, I think, in the climate movement that I put out so much positivity, so people do tend to give that back to me. And I think when I first started creating content, I would frame it as, here's today's good climate news, or here's a good climate story, a good climate solution. And I would use accurate terminology to describe the stories that I'm telling that are very climate coded. After a time, I had done some reading and read some kind of interesting stories from great communicators. And they talked a lot about how we need to meet people where they are. And actually, I read this great book by Catherine Hayhoe called Saving Us. And she is a great scientist, and she would kind of go around the country and talk about these climate topics, but not say climate change. And she would go to a group of farmers and talk about how, the lack of rainwater is destroying their output of crops. And they'd be like, yeah, like totally, I totally understand that. And they, of course, relate because these stories are universal. It's really not political. It's not as divided as, I guess, an external viewpoint may feel like it is. It's just certain terminology, people put up a wall. And it's because of perhaps different things they've consumed. So I stopped framing things as strictly climate. And I'm just like, here's today's good news. And then if you listen to the stories, they're almost all related to the environment. But they are universal. And I try and cover stories from around the world. I live in the US, so I certainly have a bias to finding American news. But I try and cover different states and cities and communities. And people love it when, they hear about a story that they didn't know from kind of their own backyard, so to speak. It just reaffirms that, people care about the cause as a whole. But when we can kind of latch onto something that's personal to them, they'll resonate with it further. The other thing people really like is something kind of cool and wonky and something they never heard of. So, for example, there's this microbe found in a type of mealworm that can digest plastic. And people are like, that's kind of insane and like a little freaky. Or there's a paint that reflects like 90% of light and drastically cools off surfaces because it's like a very pure white. And it just bounces the rays of sun right back up and can drastically cool down buildings. Like stories about kind of scientific solutions like that most people haven't heard of is another one they really enjoy.
I have to go back to social media for a second because most of us don't have hundreds of thousands of followers, and we've heard so much about the negative side of social media. I'm curious to know about the pressures you feel from social media, and having found a positive use for social media, do you wrestle with social media?
Absolutely. I think social media can be great and can be really bad. I'm not immune to the mental health defects that come from social media. There's a lot of pressure, and it's kind of an economy that revolves around attention. And if you're not getting the attention that you want, you feel bad. And that's an unfortunate model. I think that there's a lot of misinformation and disinformation on social media that's very harmful. There is, a mystery around the algorithm that is very prejudiced towards certain types of people that is unacceptable. However, there's also so much good that comes out of social media. It just generates kind of a movement behind a cause and spreads information so much more effectively than anything else ever. There's literally never been another time where you or I can pick up our phone, talk for 30 seconds, and 5 million people will hear it. We don't even need to have a platform already to do it, especially with the rise of TikTok. There's so much organic reach and so many strangers see your content, maybe even over your followers sometimes. So it's such an effective tool at reaching people and generating awareness. If you're good at communicating something, there's a lot of power there that you can really spark change for better or for worse. It kind of depends on the type of person you are. I, of course, believe that most people are using it for good. And I've met a lot of other really great creators, and we have a great community that we're supporting each other through, both commenting and engaging with our content and also helping each other when we're down. Inevitably, it's hard. It's hard being in a position where we get such immediate feedback. It's like I post something, and if people don't like it, I know right away, and they will not hold back. They'll tell me. And even if people do like it, it can get thousands of likes. But if there's 3 comments and they're all like, "You suck, I hate this," that's what I'm going to remember, because kind of the brain is hardwired that way. So I think a lot of groups and techniques and just having thick skin, that's made it a lot easier for me to deal with it. And also the fact that I care so much about this mission and this message that I'm trying to tell, that even, with any job, it'll have highs and lows. And when I'm at the lows, I'm still motivated to keep doing it because I believe so much in the result that it can have.
Right. Now, just remind me again how I pick up my phone and get 5 million people to listen to me.
Say something good. I mean, listen, I'll give you some tips. Some tips and tricks.
Jacob, a listener was asking me a question the other day, and shout out to Jock for thinking deeply and sharing it with us. He asked, how do we make this climate activism thing cool for youth to be a part of?
I think that it's a lot cooler when you actually experience it. I don't know if you have ever been to a protest or a strike surrounded by thousands of other people. I've had the pleasure of going to many, and New York City has a lot of people, so they've been quite crowded. I went to one that had nearly 100,000 people, went to one with a couple of thousand students, and being in that environment surrounded by so many passionate people all marching and dancing and chanting and yelling together and being creative with the signs that they create and caring so much about this cause to sacrifice their time and some safety to really try and make change is incredibly motivating. Every time I've gone to a protest, I've just been energized for the rest of the day. And it's fun too. And I think a lot of climate action is fun. I've cleaned up a bunch of parks, and it's usually really cool people there. We're playing music. You get to enjoy the outdoors. Like, that's a lot of fun. I'm sure the same with beach cleanups. Unfortunately, I don't live close to a beach, but it's got to be a similar impact there. And the people that you meet are really cool. They're usually working on something great, or they're volunteering with an organization, or they have some cool ideas, or they just, or are a normal person and they're nice, and it's a lot of fun getting to talk to and meet other people in your community.
Right. So get out there and get connected, young people.
Absolutely.
And old people.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone.
Now, before we wrap up today, I have to ask you about your climate action, Jacob. What have you chosen?
Yeah, so I thought about this for a bit. I think my best climate action is to talk about climate. The importance of positivity in the climate movement and talking about solutions is extremely underrated. And I think that the most effect that I see is when I talk to someone who is not already in the climate world. It's someone who, I'm in a separate class with, or it's a friend who is a lawyer or works in finance or whatever they are. Just bringing up things that I've heard about and asking their opinion on things, and just the way that you'd bring up any other topic, normalizing it. I think that climate affects every single person on planet Earth, and it's just going to continue impacting us more. So we all need to have awareness of it, and we all need to do things to make it a little bit better, both on, preventing worse ramifications as well as adapting. And I think that a lot of climate actions will come naturally when you're talking about climate. It's very related. If someone switches their bank away from one of the big banks that funds fossil fuels and into a climate bank, it's a great way to continue talking about other topics. If you go over and you see someone cooking dinner and they create a lot of food scraps, and you can be like, did you hear about community composting in the local farmers market? If you were meeting us up with someone from a cafe or at a cafe, and you bring your reusable mug and you ask the barista to just fill coffee in the reusable mug, which most places should let you do, your friend might be like, oh, I never thought about that. Like, that just never crossed my mind to do, to just save that one cup. But the more you do it, the more your friends do it, the more strangers do it, it just becomes a collective movement, and it's a domino effect, and the long-term effects of what can happen are just impossible to predict.
So keep taking those little steps. That's certainly what we're all about here. And this last question might be a bit redundant because you're surrounded by hope, it seems, in the stories you choose every day. But what gives you hope?
People. Definitely people. I think the more that I learned about climate and continue learning about climate all the time, the more I realized that every problem we have also has people working on solutions, people working really hard on solutions, really smart, really dedicated people. And I genuinely am blown away by the fact that there can be so many solutions happening at the same time. And I think hope is one of the most powerful tools we have. It motivates people to sacrifice things to achieve the impossible, to change our minds. The only reason that these people are working on the solutions is because they believe in a future where they can fix this problem too. And that's why I think hope is the most important aspect to solving the climate crisis. It's It's believing in a better future that we can achieve by implementing all these solutions and by continuing to spread the message and by really truly imagining a future that we can live in that is better in so many ways. As a kind of an icebreaker question, a lot of the time ask, would you rather travel to the future or to the past? And I want to travel to the future in 100 years because I firmly believe that we will solve a lot of these problems and we'll be living in a much better world. And I would love to see what that's like.
Well, it's wonderful to hear someone who's so involved in environmental action saying that, because so many people who are in that position are saying, I don't want to look at the future. So great points to remember. And Jacob, thank you so much for taking time out to join us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. It was such a pleasure. I love talking about all this.
And thank you, dear listener. As always, we welcome your feedback about anything you hear on the program. Just send us a message via social media or email us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. We will be back again next week, same time, same place, to hear from another climate action figure. Until then,
go figure. Did I get that right? Go figures.
That's right? It.
Okay.
This has been Climate Action Figures. Our show is produced and hosted by John Whidden. Our creative consultant is Kayla McIntosh. Our theme song is Hawaii Vacation by Tavari. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Climate Action Figures. That's all one word. And if you have any other questions or comments that arose from this or any episode, feel free to reach out to us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another Climate Action Figure.